Welcome to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to the DFO Rundown, episode 67, the Max Pacioretty. So hopefully we'll be scoring some listeners on this episode. Welcome to the DFO Rundown, brought to you by Fantrax, the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty keeper or redraft leagues. Check it out at fantrax.com/DFO Rundown, and that's where you can register, and then you're entered to win a signed Nathan MacKinnon jersey. As I welcome in Frank Seravalli once again. Frankie, how you doing?
Hey, what's up?
I just called you Frankie. I don't think I've ever called you Frankie. Does anyone call you Frankie?
Actually, that was my name for the first 14 years of my life. That's all anyone ever called me. And then for whatever reason, I got to high school and I was like, man, that sounds so childish. I'm going to just become Frank. And then I did.
Okay. So that's when
that's the true story.
Okay, there you go. I was wondering, do your parents ever call you Frankie still?
Not really.
No. That's fair. Because usually, like, I would assume it would have been your parents who started calling you that, or was it your buddy?
Yeah, because my dad's name is Fran, so they wanted some sort of differentiation. So.
Oh, he didn't go with Fran Jr. Jeez, could have been a junior.
Nope.
Nice. Well, welcome into the woodjerseys.com studio. Of course, Wood Jersey is an official licensed product and looks great in your office, fan cave, or wherever you want to show off your fandom. As you'll see, Frank, I got a new one coming. I got a new one. I'll unveil it.
Keep saying it.
Next week. Well, hey, I don't want to chirp anybody, but hey, Jared, feel free to drop it off. So there you go.
I could, if the Wood Jerseys people are listening, I'd be down for a new one.
Yeah, why not?
I want to get one of these DFO ones that is supposedly coming to Tyler as well, a little custom made.
Yeah. Tyler's been teasing about that for 2 months, so maybe he's not getting it. We'll see. We'll find out when he joins us later on in buy or sell. Now, Frank, it's officially unofficial. I guess the Pettersson and the Hughes contracts. One in Hughes a little bit longer. It's 6 years, and lots of guys reporting it as I think Rick Dhaliwal was the first one at the 7.75. What do you make of that contract?
I love it for the team. See, here's the thing: the Canucks were always in the fives with Quinn Hughes in terms of their offers, and then the Rasmus Dahlin contract with the Buffalo Sabres 3x6 sort of blew that out of the water. So they knew at that point they were somewhere in the sixes. The Hughes camp was always sort of in that 6.5 range. And that was on a 3-year deal. And so then I think what happens is you take the numbers and you start to extrapolate them and you say, okay, well, what if we go to 4 years? What if we go to 6 years? What do those numbers look like? So to go from 6.5 on a 3-year deal to somewhere in the neighborhood of 7.75 by the time this is all said and done on a 6-year deal, I think it makes sense when you have a foundational pillar, a 50-point defenseman. And look, I know that people were all over Quinn Hughes for the season that he had last year. He's a special, special talent. You try and buy as many years as you can. So to rip off 6 at a time, you put $46 million or a little more than that in Quinn Hughes' pocket, some guaranteed life-changing dough. And then he's going to get a new deal at age 28 or 29, which is a win for him. So he's going to have this next deal coming to him. The team buys up as many years as they can, almost 6 out of 8. And I think this is a win for the Canucks moving forward. It's going to be a lot trickier on Elias Pettersson.
Yeah, I'm curious about Hughes. When you pay a guy 7.75, he's obviously going to have to improve his defensive play. He's a young defenseman. He's only played 2 years, so that will come. I also think it will help them having him sheltered a little bit, because when he played with Tanev 2 years ago, like, Tanev is just a rock solid defender, and he's not flashy, but he allowed Hughes to really be the Quinn Hughes, and Hughes didn't have to defend as much. Last year he had to defend more. So I think his partner this season will be key for them to allow Hughes to be who he wants and slowly integrate more of the defensive side. Now, you mentioned it'll be difficult more for Pettersson because we're hearing a 3-year deal for him.
Yeah, 3-year deal somewhere south of $8 million. And look, he's such a productive player. He's the heartbeat of that team, so creative. He's one of those rare get you out of your seat players as a fan in the NHL. And obviously the injuries last year slowed him down a bit, but still, to get him on 3 years, though, I'm really going to be curious to see what the price tag is for that 3rd year on the deal. Now, the formula had changed a bit in this new CBA that was executed in 2020 about how that works in terms of the third year, and it needs to be close to the average of the deal in order for that to be the qualifying offer for the next year, since Elias Pettersson will still be an RFA at the end of those 3 years. The good thing is, I think most importantly, you get these two guys on the ice. You're going to have 10 days now by the time they go through the protocols and everything else before the regular season starts in what is a pressure-packed season for the Vancouver Canucks, because they need everything to go right. They're playing in a wide open division, and you can't start the year without your two best players, your most gifted offensive player and your point producer on the back end. They are now getting those deals done close. We expect it sometime on Friday, the official announcement, and they need to move forward. Let's get these guys in town. Let's get them on the ice. You deal with whatever happens with Elias Pettersson 3 years from now and what that costs you later. But I think the other win in getting Elias Pettersson south of 8 is that when some of these other guys come up in short order, your Bo Horvats, your Brock Bessers, if you know that Elias Pettersson is your top offensive player, the guy that's setting the bar for your team, well, then everyone needs to come in below them. So it helps set a little bit of a salary structure, even if it is on a bridge deal, even if it doesn't buy any UFA years, which is what you'd have to do with Besser and Horvat probably in their next contracts. So those are all things to weigh. But I think to get these deals done now before it really push comes to shove with the opening night of the regular season, the Canucks needed to do it.
Yeah, I look at Pettersson and, his skill and his shot. Like, he's got one of the best, maybe the best wrist shot release going. There's not many guys who shoot like that. The challenge for him, of course, has been injuries. 3 years he's been injured. Obviously, last year was the worst, but he's missed significant time. Anytime you miss more than 10 games every year, and you're a team's best player. So that's going to be, and that's hard one to predict for any player, but you know what? He's not a very big man. He's kind of a slight skilled guy. So you just hope that, it's unlucky injuries for him. But if he can stay healthy, then I think Vancouver's chances of being a playoff team are significantly higher. I look at Vancouver right now, and now that him and Hughes are signed, I would put them as number 3 in the Pacific Division to start the regular season. Have Edmonton and Vegas, and then Vancouver. We'll see where Calgary is. I'm not, I know there's a lot of projections about Seattle. I got to see their team so far on the road. It was very, Jekyll and Hyde, which rosters they had going.
Right.
But
it's an AHL roster.
Yeah. I'm a little curious about, do they have the offensive punch? Because clearly they're building their team from their goaltender and their defense. And that's fine. But, ultimately you still need somebody to score. Like, I think everybody forgets when Vegas made the playoffs, an expansion team, William Karlsson had 40 goals, that season.
Yeah. Look, I think Seattle's going to be competitive. I don't see them as a playoff team this year as currently constituted, but I think that they're going to be in a position in April or March to be knocking on the door and at least make it interesting in their market, which I think as an expansion franchise is really all you can ask for. And I think a lot of that's due to the general openness of the Pacific Division in general. I mean, like you said, you've got Vegas and you've got Edmonton. That's how I see it. And then I think it's wide open after the fact in terms of who is vying for those final 2 or 3 playoff spots.
Quickly, anything new you're hearing on Brady Tkachuk?
Nothing new to this point. These two sides remain in conversation and communication. I've never gotten the sense that it's been contentious. They've had a string of meetings that, I think have provided some fruitful dialogue. I think the Tkachuk camp to this point is probably leaning more towards a shorter term bridge deal. I think the Sens have pushed really hard to get him on a longer term deal. What that structure would look like, can they wring out any signing bonus? Those are all things that I think are really important, and quite clearly they haven't been able to find common ground yet.
And our first, I guess we'll call it in-season significant injury, goes to a team that really couldn't afford it in the Detroit Red Wings, and Vrana's out now for at least 4 months. He was going to be on their top line. He was excellent after being after the trade deadline last season with Detroit, and I think there was a lot of excitement on what he could potentially do in Detroit. That's a huge loss for a team. They're in a tough division. I thought the Wings would have been hard-pressed to make the playoffs, but now you take out one of their top-line guys. before the season even begins, it's a bad look for the Wings.
Yeah, and when you're already thin, like, look, how are you expected to compete when you take a piece like that out of your lineup? That's really their big issue is they have players, but they don't have a long list of difference makers. And Verana was certainly going to be one of those. And you think about the trade that went down last year that really kind of shocked everyone at the deadline and the waning minutes before the deadline. That was one of those ones that was sort of core changing for the Detroit Red Wings. And now moving forward, not having Verana for the next 4 months in a year when I think you wanted to take a little step forward. I'm fascinated still to see the kind of season that Alex Nedeljkovic has in net. He can be their goaltender of the future, in addition to obviously the big first round pick that they made this year. But to me, it's that team's going to have such a hard time competing in that division to get anywhere near a playoff spot. It just feels like a purgatory for Detroit.
Now, we're going to get to buy or sell momentarily, but first, big shout out to all of our listeners, because the more listeners you have, then guess what? More advertisers want to come on board. And so we welcome in a new partnership with ESPN Plus. They become the must-have for hockey fans. You can get access to more than 1,000 out-of-market NHL games and 75 weekly national games all year. Plus, stream thousands of live events from the best leagues and biggest tournaments in the world. Exclusive originals, the complete 30 for 30 library. Love that show. Premium articles and fantasy tools and more with ESPN Plus. You can sign up now at espnplus.com/NHL/DFO. And now we welcome in to the Wood Jersey studio is Tyler Yaremchuk back with us for another rip-roaring edition of Buy or Sell. First of all, Ty, how you doing? Because your Jays, man, they're on the brink now. They got to sweep the Orioles and get some help. How you feeling?
Yeah, I'm not feeling good about that, Jason. I drank my sorrow away last night, so that is why my voice is maybe a little shot right now as well. But I'm not giving up hope. You're right. They have a chance.
At least they didn't gag on it like my Phillies did. My God, between two series, they had the Pirates and the Orioles back to back, two of the worst teams in baseball, followed by a 3-game clash against the team you're chasing and only a few games behind, and you get swept. Come on.
Well, the good news is that the Philly fans are very forgiving and not
We're a
at all
tolerant
ruthless.
bunch.
Yeah,
Yep.
very forgiving.
You guys started the show talking about the Vancouver Canucks, and we are going to get into some Pacific Division talk here in just a second. But first, Buy or Sell is brought to you by Bounty Sports. It's the world's first daily fantasy sports platform that levels the playing field. No advanced algorithms or one-sided odds. It's just fans versus fans. We'll have more on that in the coming weeks. And also with our partnership with Bounty Sports, we'll have a chance for our listeners to compete against us as we do some pick'em going forward throughout the NHL season.
Sick. Bring it on, boys and girls. Bring it on.
Let's get into Buy or Sell, though. In the Pacific, I'm going to say only 3 teams find a way to make the playoffs, and the other 5 are going to come from the Central. 3 teams in the Pacific making the playoffs. Frank, you buying or selling?
I'm buying 100%. I was thinking that that's going to happen between the Atlantic and also the Central, that they're going to both gobble up 5 spots. But yeah, I mean, look at the Central. I mean, my 5 playoff teams in the Central are Winnipeg, Minnesota, Dallas, Colorado, and St. Louis. So I don't see one of the sort of lingering or lagging Pacific teams that's sort of humming along there, knocking one of those teams off the perch and out of the playoffs.
Yeah, this one I didn't buy on the Atlantic last time, but I will buy on this one with the Central. Only because I'm like Calgary and Vancouver right now, I think are the 2 teams that are going to battle for 3 and 4, and I'm not sure if one of them can surpass the other. I will say this though, the Central is going to be tough. Don't sleep on the Blackhawks. They're my surprise team. I actually have the Blackhawks bouncing back. They got 6 significant new additions, so I have them actually as one of my 5 making the postseason out of the Central.
6 significant additions, and if Kirby Dach and Jonathan Taves are both healthy all year, that's another couple of big additions for them as well. So I like that point. You guys touched on this a little bit earlier, so we already kind of know your answers, but I'm going to say 3 playoff teams in the Pacific, and Seattle won't be one of them, mainly due to their lack of goal scoring. Jason, you buying or selling?
Oh yeah, all the way. Honestly, I'm not sure Seattle finishes higher than 6th in the Pacific Division. I know that there's all the Vegas expansion and everyone's still in love with it. Now, while Seattle might only finish 6th in the Pacific, they'll finish 1st in New Jerseys. I saw their new one live in person. Man, that thing pops. That white jersey is unreal. real. I love it. So
feels like you need a
kudos.
wood jersey for that.
I know. Trust me. I want to get one. And but that jersey, seen it live in person when they played the exhibition game in Edmonton, like it pops. Awesome. It was awesome. But
you're a sucker for teal.
I don't think. Oh, I love the teal. I don't think they have. I don't think. Although that might be turquoise. I'm not even sure. But they I don't think have the offensive punch to get in the playoffs.
I'm gonna buy Tyler, and I'm thinking that the Los Angeles Kings have a chance at that third and final playoff spot in the Pacific too. I do think their defense and their back end, it gets thin in a hurry. But I think that they have the goaltending to get it done. They've got a much improved forward core. And I think they've got some young guys that are ready to take a step forward. So I see it Vegas 1, Edmonton 2, and then I have Vancouver, Calgary, and LA in that mix for the third spot.
Number 3, the Edmonton Oilers finished 7th in goals for last season. They added Zach Hyman. They added Warren Fogle into the mix as well. I'm going to say the Edmonton Oilers come top 5 in the league in goals scored this upcoming season. Frank, you buying or selling?
I am buying. I mean, Zach Hyman should score a ridiculous amount. They were so close to getting there they're only 8 goals away from getting there. So it's not a ginormous leap. In fact, they were only 14 away from being number 1, which was Colorado last year. I think Pittsburgh is probably going to tumble a bit. They were second with 196. Not sure that Washington is going to be quite up there, although Ovi could give you 50 plus on his own. And Matthews should score some more. So I think Toronto will be up there as well. I'm going to buy. Look, that's 3 for 3. These are good questions. 3 buys from me.
Yeah, I'm buying all day long. I wrote about it earlier. The other reason is because they're power play. And with the increased power play opportunities, Edmonton's power play is going to score more goals. But 5-on-5, they will be better because it's virtually impossible to be worse from a support standpoint. And it's funny, even last year, Edmonton finished 9th in 5-on-5 goals last year, despite having very little outside of their top 2 centers and Jesse Puljujärvi scoring at 5-on-5. So I think they'll be a top 5. I'll say this, they'll finish top 3 in goals.
Oh, there we go. Up in the stakes a little bit. I love it. 4th question here. Our friends over at pointsbet.com have set the line for the San Jose Sharks this season at 83.5 points. That's a little bit too high for me. They might not come dead last in the Pacific, but 83.5 is a bit high. I'm going to say they go under 83.5 points. Jason, you buying or selling?
Yeah, I buy that. It's funny. All of the off-ice issues right now that around Evander Kane, he was still their best player on the ice last year, and by a large margin. Like, he was easily their best player. So they're going to take out their best player. We don't know when he's going to be back for them. So let's say he misses 2 months of the season. Well, I know their goaltending will be better because they've had 3 years in a row where Jones had an .896 save percentage. So obviously they'll increase there. But 83 points, man, that's a lot. So no, I say they definitely come under.
I'm going to sell. And here's why. I think the Sharks are like a 3 on the blackjack table. You never really quite know what you're going to get. And that's not an Evander Kane gambling reference. They're dangerous to play against because I think there's some motivation there. The goaltending is going to be better. As dreadful as they were last year, they were still on a 72-point pace through the season. And so, yes, that's some significant ground to make up. But I do think that with some proper rest now, and with their defense core needing or trying to make a statement, that I think it's possible that they're right in that window to make it really, really uncomfortable for you. And I think if you're going to go and swing big on an over/under points bet for the season, for me, it would have to be something that I'm way more comfortable with than that.
Last question here. A lot of hype around the Canucks now. They got their 2 big RFAs signed. I'm going to say they come 3rd out of the Canadian teams in their division. They will finish below Edmonton and Calgary this year. Frank, you buying or selling?
Can you repeat the question?
The Canucks will finish below the Flames and Oilers, 3rd out of the Canadian teams in their division this season.
I'm selling. I think the Canucks are better than Calgary. I really, honestly, Calgary to me confounds me more than almost any other team.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I don't know what they are. I don't know what their direction is. I don't know what they're thinking or their plan is. I listened to Daryl Sutter, and I understand what he wants to do. I just don't know that he has the pieces to do what he wants to do. And I'm still not entirely sure what to make of their back end. Jacob Markstrom should be better, so that should give them a fighting chance. But I'm Calgary, like it's a giant question mark for me.
Yeah, they're the wild card for sure in the Pacific.
They could be great. They could be terrible. They could be in the middle. Like they're really all over the place.
Yeah, like Johnny Gaudreau, Matthew Tkachuk, they've both got the potential to have big bounce back seasons. You know, Sean Monahan quietly played through an injury last year. Sean Monahan, up until last year, had actually had more goals than Nathan McKinnon in the same draft class, right? Like Sean Monahan's been pretty much a 30-goal scorer his entire career.
30.
Yeah, and so I think he bounces back, but my concern is on their back end. I'm looking at their blue line, and I'm like, can they?
They don't
defend
have a number one D man
well enough, but. Their offense is intriguing to me that they're the wild card. So you know what? I'm actually going to sell and say that the Flames somehow squeak ahead of the Canucks.
All right, there you go. That is Buy or Sell, brought to you by Bounty Sports, the world's first daily fantasy sports platform that levels the playing field. Check them out, bountysports.com. We should have a promo code coming in the next week as well, and a chance, like I said, to compete against us here on the Rundown in a little pick'em. It'll be a ton of fun. Check them out, Bounty Sports.
Yeah. Who doesn't love competition, man? Absolutely love it. Now, speaking of competition, there's lots of it in Pittsburgh, only because of it. Now, guys are competing for the center ice position that they usually would never compete for. The number 1 and number 2 center spots have been locked up in Pittsburgh for basically since Crosby arrived in 2005, and then Malkin followed him the next year. But injuries to Malkin, he's out for a few months. Sidney Crosby's missing at least the first week of the season. We'll find out, though, how much more he's going to miss as we get to our guest today, brought to you by DoorDash, proud sponsor of the Nation Networks of podcasts. Use the promo code RUNDOWNDD. Gets first-time users 25% off when they use the app and free delivery. So check it out at DoorDash right now as we welcome in Rob Rossi.
Our next guest has been covering the Pittsburgh Penguins since 2003, a Steel City native who I'm lucky to call not just one of my closest friends in the business, but one of my closest friends in life, Rob Rossi. Welcome to the DFO Rundown.
Frankie, good to see you, my man. Yeah, I've known you a long time. So
yeah, unfortunately,
you're one of the few people I've tried not to forget. So
well, yeah, there you go.
I thought Pittsburgh and Philly guys, did you guys have to fight in the back alley once and then just become friends? How's that work?
Well, I would say that Frank and I probably both had enough people in our own markets that disliked us that we found a natural bond, honor amongst thieves, I guess.
Yeah, we were sort of the outsiders that became insiders, I guess is how you would call it. But Rob, wanted to connect with you and get the lowdown on the Pittsburgh Penguins. What a fascinating season this is going to be. So much to unfold. I guess initially, what's the feel at camp? No Sid, no Gino for the first time in feels like forever. This team has somehow found a way, even in the last couple years, to get itself into the playoffs. What's the feel in training camp and what's the buzz like?
Well, from my perspective, it's been a fun camp because usually we come to these things, it's like the roster's completely set. We convince ourselves there are some storylines and they're really not. So this has been fun because, other than Sidney Crosby, doing some individual workouts before practices, it's really been focusing a lot on guys that, if not with a chance to make the team, certainly a chance on the team to have different roles. But I don't think there is as much buzz. And I don't think that's just because of Crosby and Malkin being non-factors this camp. That's part of it. But I think a lot of it is they've peppered out in the playoffs 3 years in a row. And unlike the off seasons that followed, 2 of those, their general manager is new, and Ron Hextall is not as splashy and aggressive as was Jim Rutherford. I don't know that anybody is as aggressive as was Jim Rutherford, but people weren't excited about their off season. I think people are sort of at least in Pittsburgh right now, I think there's this sort of they're walking this line, the fan bases, of, do we believe that this team will, as it has in recent seasons, probably outperform what the expectations would be based off what were a lot of injuries in those years? Or do we think this is sort of what it's about to become? And until they do new deals for Malkin and Letang, I think there's a lot of uncertainty around this team. And I think the fan base is sort of reflecting that.
Will they do new deals for Malkin and Letang? Like, I think that's what everyone wants to know.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes. Provided both of those players are, interested in, again, taking sort of a hometown haircut. I don't see how they don't keep Chris Letang from a hockey on ice standpoint, because he is still their best defenseman. Guys like him, look, if you paid Chris Letang $725, which is his current number, on like a 3-year extension, I think you'd still be getting pretty good value from him, because he's still a guy that can play 25, 26 minutes a night. It's a right-handed shot. And last year was one of his best years in terms of both staying healthy and productivity. And Todd Reardon and him, the assistant coach they brought back last season, seemed to find a real way of bringing out the best in Chris. With Evgeni, I think there's a completely different dynamic there. Evgeni wants to stay, but and I know Evgeni pretty well. And I think if you talk to the Penguins ownership and you talk to their business side and even their hockey end, they'd go, look, all things being equal, we'd like to keep Evgeni Malkin. And, he's expressed a desire to do a 3-year deal. And I think he'd take less money, maybe even significantly less. But this knee injury is so much a wild card now, because, Evgeni's 35. This will be the second time he's had his knee repaired in a decade. It's a different type of repair. This time the ligament is different than the previous ligament, but at the end of the day, I mean, I think he's going to have to make a decision on, does he want to sign a 1-year deal and try to see where he's at? What I don't have a good feel for from Evgeni is, if he comes back and is not able to play at the level that he's comfortable with, if he's really going to be interested in playing hockey. And I don't think we'll know that, or he can know that, until he gets back. And to be honest, gentlemen, I don't think we're going to see him back until December at the, probably mid-December, late December at the earliest.
So he's missing 2 months for sure. What about Sid? You're watching him. We know that he's going to miss at least a week. Our listeners on Fan Tracks, they want to know, how high do you take him in the season draft? How many games is he going to play, do you think?
I mean, do you want to be the person that doesn't take Sidney Crosby? I guess that's the better question. I would say this. I think we're probably looking at a couple of weeks without Sid on the ice in Pittsburgh. He's looked good in these warm-ups, but, the concern, as it was expressed to me by people I've talked to, and also I think mine from just watching, is it's a left wrist injury. It's an injury that's been giving him problems for years. He aggravated an old injury, but not the way it was injured before, from what I was told in the offseason. What concerns me is it's his left. He's a left shot. When you have that left wrist surgery, I'm worried about the sort of the total beating he will absorb just in face-offs. That's the arm he uses to really low, and he's become a really great face-off guy. I don't think it's going to affect his shot. I don't think it's going to affect his stick handling, but I think depending on how much strength he's been able to build back up into that wrist, and look, I had wrist surgery in the offseason along with elbow surgery, and I'm certainly not a hockey player, but so much of Sidney is going into the boards and spinning out and using momentum. And how often, gentlemen, have we seen Sidney Crosby sort of use that left arm to give himself that push, that extra space that he's so great at creating for himself? And I just think it's going to take some time to get comfortable with that. And if you're opponents, you're going to know that. So I think the better production from Sidney will probably come maybe in the second half of the season. But if you're feeling, I guess if you're into fantasy hockey, if he goes low, I'd take him. I don't know if I'd take him real high. And that's the first and only time I'll probably ever say that.
So, Rob, in the past, when Crosby was out, Malkin would step up and he would elevate. Now, he's an elite player. He's a Hall of Famer. even though he wasn't in the top 100. I still think that's a joke, but nonetheless, who do they have? Who can step up? And like, I think it's impossible to fill the shoes of both, but who's going to do it on the short term until Crosby comes back? And then who's going to be the second line center for the first 2 months?
Both of those are great questions. I'll say this. I think that their number 2 center right now is Teddy Bluger, but I don't know that will be their second scoring line.
Okay.
They like Bluger to play with Zach Aston Reese in a real sort of shutdown line. Those two played with Brandon Tanev for a while. I think you're going to see them play together again and sort of maybe try to fit somebody in. I think you're going to see Raheem Zadora is a guy that is a big player, comes from their system. He's very tall. You notice him. He's not a physical player. He's got some skill. I think he's going to see some time as the sort of second scoring line center, at least in those opportunities, while Sidney's out, with Jeff Carter, going between Gensel and Rust as the number 1 center. And so when you ask me who I think needs to step up, to be honest, it's not either one of the centers. Among the forwards, I really think that guy is Jason Zucker. He is a guy who has been a really consistent and good offensive player in this league, but he has not clicked with either center in Pittsburgh. And I think there's a feeling here that he might thrive in this environment. And if he does, maybe that gets him off to the type of hot start that restores some confidence, that gets him going again, because they're going to need somebody like that to do well early and extend it through Malkin's absence, because again, they're going to be out without him for at least 2 months, probably a little longer than that. So I think you look at a guy like Zucker. I think the other way they can handle this without those 2 centers, or even with those 2 centers limited, is they do have some guys on the back end that can produce. And I think they need to be more consistent with that. Obviously, I mentioned Letang. Guy like Mike Matheson, who, quite frank, changed my mind last season. I was one of those people that was like, why did they need Mike Matheson? But he has a confidence with pushing and creating and making offensive plays that really you don't see much from guys in this league. And I think he's a guy that can find a level of consistency with that type of offense while not subtracting too much from defense. But I think I think they're gonna have to get some scoring from the back end a lot early and hope their goaltending holds up. And look, I'd be lying to you if I told you I had a whole lot of confidence in their goaltending going into this season. They seem to, but that's certainly a minority opinion in Pittsburgh.
So you talked about the center position, and obviously that's of critical importance, and I think the Penguins recognize that as well. One sort of glaring story that, when I look at the Penguins and their cap situation, that stands out to me, Brian Rust isn't signed. He has obviously 1 year left on his deal at 3.5. He's a critically important piece to this team, not just now, but probably will be moving forward, because it's not easy to find that type of production. Why isn't he signed, and do you anticipate something there?
That's a great question, Frank. I'll say this. There's been talks between Rust's camp and Penguins management, Ron Hextall. I know the Penguins would like to sign the player, but Ryan Rust, quite frankly, took a very, very team favorable deal last time. You mentioned his AAV was 3.5. I think Brian Rust looks at this market and goes, I'm a $6 million player if I go to free agency, and I'm probably going to get at least a 5, if not a 6-year deal. And look, I think there's a chance he exceeds both of those, right? So, and I think if you're the Penguins, you have to ask yourself, with a guy like Rust, who is going to turn 30 and has played a good bit of hockey when you add in the playoffs. Yes, he's had the 2 best offensive seasons of his career. And look, I've been telling people I think Brian Rust is a dark horse candidate to make the U.S. Olympic team, because Brian Rust is one of those guys that can produce as a top 6, but is really comfortable playing in a 3rd and 4th line role. He's a great penalty killer. He plays a physically abrasive game. He's not a thumper, but he doesn't shy away from contact. He is a very fast player and a very good skater, not just one or the other. And he has a moment, he was called Mr. Game 7 around here for a long time because he scored big goals in deciding games. So all of those things are going to help him if he goes to the market. I just don't know how willing Brian Rust is to take a significant discount to stay in Pittsburgh right now. And I think that's what he would have to do. And I don't know that it's money, Frank. I think it might be term. I really do. I think the Penguins might look at a player like that who's going to be
because he's already 29, right? So
Right, yeah.
if you're about to
Right.
embark on this rebuild or whatever you want to call it, retool, whatever language the Penguins want to use, by the time you get to where you want to get to, Brian Rust might be 34. And is he the guy that really makes sense to dig in and sign long-term?
No, I don't. And I think that's what they're weighing, right? Because they've already got one of those guys a little bit younger, but in Jake Gensel. They signed Jake to a $30 million total contract. It was a 5-year, $6 million deal when he signed it. And, you know, I think they'd be fine giving Brian Rust something like that. But the problem is, I think Brian looks at it and goes, I can get more term and I might be able to get a little more money. And, you know, I asked Brian this question at the end of last season, and it was a really, sometimes these guys don't say anything about this stuff. Sometimes they give you an answer that's so glaring that you kind of hold on to it. And I asked him how much he became a father for the first time. And I said, how much does, you know, now being a family man play into this? And he said, look, with the opportunity to become a free agent, you know, my family is my first priority. Taking care of them is my first priority. And I don't know if this can work. And I don't know what they do if it can't, because if they are a playoff team this year, it's hard to imagine them being a playoff team without Brian Rust the whole year. And if they aren't, what message it would send to their fans about maybe dealing a Brian Rust near or at the deadline when they could probably get a lot for him because of his playoff pedigree. I think we have to wait and let that play out. But I have thought that if the Rust situation isn't resolved, you know, say by Thanksgiving, U.S. Thanksgiving, then we're probably looking at the writing on the wall being that Brian Rust situation isn't going to be resolved favorably in Pittsburgh.
Well, that was actually going to bring me to my next question, because you mentioned the sort of metaphor of Penguins fans walking the line. I wonder if, you know, in this season that we're entering, where all this attention is being paid to Letang and to Malkin, that maybe Russ is the guy that we should be looking at the trade deadline. That's like, hey, we could probably get way more for this guy than the other two guys, depending on, again, how they're playing, he might be the guy that everyone's circling saying like, hey, this makes sense.
Yeah, now ends any suspense. That's absolutely correct, because they would not trade Evgeni Malkin or Chris Letang. First of all,
why? Wait a second. What? I need to stop you there. Why?
At this point, it's my understanding from people that know Mario Lemieux that has said his interest is in them retiring as Penguins, but that he doesn't want to trade them, and certainly not trade them in season. Secondly, I don't know what you'd get for Evgeni Malkin right now. I mean, he's coming off that knee injury. He's going to be a free agent. He would have to waive his no trade clause. He's got a full no trade clause. And with Chris Letang, he has a limited no movement clause. I think you could get something for him, but I just don't think that is a factor, because from what I've been told, you know, the owner of this team feels like those two have done so much for the franchise that it's one thing if they decide to walk away, you know, they want to go somewhere else, but unless they demand a trade, you don't move them. And as far as I can tell, knowing both of those guys, neither one of them are interested in demanding a trade. So I think you start looking at Rust. I really do. I think you start looking at Rust, and I would say probably another guy to watch, depending on how this year plays out. A lot of people are looking at Marcus Pettersson, who is a defenseman who is big, and by his own
they tried to move him all summer.
Yeah, they did. I think the guy to look at, if I'm sort of giving you maybe a dark horse, is John Marino. I don't get the sense that this management team is as effusive of Marino as the previous management group was. I also get the sense they feel, because even though they're different shots, because they have Pierre-Olivier Joseph in the system, and they like him and what he does offensively, and that because Marino still is thought of as a pretty good player in this league, that they might be able to get a haul for him. And I don't know that they feel that the $5 million price tag, or close to it, it's close to was it 4.5 for Marino, something like that?
4-4.
4-4. Yeah, I don't think they feel that is great value for where Marino's at right now.
But shouldn't that tell teams that are trying to trade for him or would be interested that if the team that he's playing on doesn't like him at 4-4, that he might not be worth it?
Well, probably. I think teams might have a different evaluation. I guess in the scenario I'm talking about is I could see a situation where if Marino's play returns to sort of a form closer to his rookie year, that might be one of those guys where they look at and go, maybe he doesn't fit the mold of what we want in terms of guys that are their idea of playoff type players. And that might be a move where they could get a lot for him. And in this system, I can tell you, I watched prospect camp. This system is so barren of anything after when you get away from Joseph, right? There's just not a lot there. There's a couple guys that have stood out, but like none of them are, Legare and Poulin are, I mean, in Pittsburgh, they're the top prospects, but I don't think anybody else would have them screaming up their list. The one guy I've liked in their camp is a guy named Jonathan Gruden, not the hockey coach, or not the football coach, excuse me, or hockey coach. I don't know what Gruden's doing out there these days. Where Vegas is going, maybe he'll do both at some point. But Jonathan Gruden looked like, but I mean, he's going to be like a Teddy Bluger type, and that's going to be a couple years down the line. I think if they think they could move a guy like Marino to get some real top end talent in this system, because they have Joseph that could sort of fill in as that sort of guy that's a younger defenseman that could grow with his team. I think that's something they would consider, provided it's not a dump, but an actual hockey trade.
Rob, we talked earlier about the goaltending and because it's funny, recency bias, we all have it, but man, what happened in the postseason, Penguins fans were not happy. Everybody saw it. They felt like, it cost them some games. You look at Tristan
Everybody
Jarry.
but Jarry saw it.
Yeah, you got Casey DeSmith. He's got 1 year left on his deal.
Yeah.
Is Jarry like the guaranteed starter here? What do you see they do in goal as far as a rotation basis goes? And do you think Jarry can bounce back?
I think Jarry's the starter going into the season. I don't know that I'd feel comfortable saying he's going to be the starter by mid-season. I wouldn't be surprised if it's him and Casey DeSmith sort of splitting time. I mean, really, it might have been that last year more had Casey DeSmith been healthier. And no, I don't know that Jarry can't. I mean, there's a lot of talent there, but we're talking about a guy that at the NHL level had a brilliant late November, entire December, and 3 weeks of January 2 years ago. And then after that, he's been at best average. And if you look at a lot of the metrics that exist out there for goaltending, he's below average, and a lot that you would look at. And this is an organization run by a former goaltender in this league who also has a pretty Frank, you can speak to this probably as well as me. I think Ron Hextall, for whatever people might wonder, I think it's pretty clear out there. He's an affinity for statistics. He has affinity for that type of metric-based analysis, at least in sort of decision making in terms of players' futures and that. And I know they've, even though they lost Sam Ventura to Buffalo, they still as an organization invest heavily in that. So I don't know. I think this is a prove it couple of months for Tristan Jarry. It's tough to tell because we're not in the room, but I just don't get the sense when I talk to players in the off season that there's a whole lot of confidence there. And nobody will say this in the organization, but they will all dance around it, which is when they say we feel like we were the better team last year against the Islanders, when they say we feel like we should have had a longer playoff run, they're not talking about, oh, they came unglued, they emotionally didn't handle things, they didn't score enough goals. Without talking about it, they're saying our goaltending wasn't good enough. And I've had people tell me that had there been a situation last postseason when Casey DeSmith was available to them, and remember, he missed the whole postseason with that hernia, the sports hernia, that he would have been the starter at some point in that series, given the way it went. And think I have questions about Jari. I think they do too. And I think if anything, we might be looking at an entirely new goaltending dynamic in Pittsburgh a year from now.
Okay. And one final one for me, Rob. You have Ron Hextall, who is, you talked about, you know, he looks at the numbers and he's very patient, whereas Brian Burke historically can be very aggressive. He's not afraid to pull off big moves. How do you see, are they going to balance each other very well? Is there one, are we going to see a patience here? Or are we going to see, no, we got to make a big swing? What do you see happening from a management perspective?
You know, I think a lot like last year. I think for the most part, they're going to be pretty cautious about this because they didn't want the Rutherford model, which was sort of throw a bunch of things at the wall and see what sticks. They wanted a more measured approach, and they want an approach where it tries to focus on keeping the team competitive, but also, you know, not completely selling every part of the future regularly, right? I mean, Jim Rutherford made 30 trades in his last 3 seasons. It was like,
God, I loved it. I loved it,
yeah,
Rob.
I loved
fantastic.
it. I look, as from a media member, we love it. But I will say, I think one of the biggest reasons they had the success in the regular season they did last year was because guys didn't come to practice every day wondering which one of us gets traded this month. Yeah. That said, I do think you saw a situation last year with regards to Jeff Carter where, now, I know at the time, Jeff Carter was not sort of maybe the most attractive guy that teams could go get, but they were pretty aggressive. They reached out to the Kings well in advance of the deadline, and they really sought permission and got permission to talk to Carter to try to sell him on this. And I think that's where you saw the Burke influence. So that tells me if the Penguins think they're good and they think they're a piece away, you're going to see a guy like Burke win out, where it's like, hey, maybe Ron doesn't want to go with this completely, but Brian can convince him. But for the most part, I think it's going to be, at least this year, a very calm, well, maybe not calm, but I think it's going to be a very calming presence because I just don't think they're going to make a ton of moves. I mean, as Frank said, they've been shopping players this summer and didn't make moves. And from what I was told, one of the reasons they didn't move Pettersson was they just feel there might be a better deal down the line. And they have so few assets in this organization to move. And Frankie, I'm sure you've heard the same thing. That the thing I've heard about Hextall from talking to other people around the league is like, he knows he doesn't have a lot of chips to play, so he can't just give one of these chips away that he might have because he needs to, you know, he needs to bat better on these deals than maybe other GMs.
So Rob, last one for me, and it gags me to say this, but the Pittsburgh market, it's been awesome to watch. You know, the interest in that team over the last 2 decades, because you were there covering it. And I went to plenty of games at the Igloo where there wasn't enough there. There wasn't enough juice. There wasn't enough interest. Mm-hmm. And the sellout streak has been ridiculous and all the interest in that team. How does this market respond to whatever's coming next? Is there gratitude for the 3 cups, and how quickly does that flip to what have you done for me lately? And how do you think this franchise, business-wise, which has, you know, it has its own different challenges because Pittsburgh is still a relatively small market in the overall grand NHL landscape, but has had this star power that's helped keep driving and keeping things afloat. From a business standpoint, how does this team find a way to bridge the gap from one end, from the Crosby era to whatever comes next?
It's a great question. My guess is that one of the reasons they will exhaust a lot of capital to try to sign Malkin and Letang to run concurrent with Crosby's remaining 3 years after this season is because from a business standpoint, they've already been told by their biggest corporate partners, you know, maybe you guys aren't a Stanley Cup team anymore, but we want those players around because in Pittsburgh, you know, it's been said to me by some people in other markets, you know, the Penguins in America for the NHL are sort of like the Lakers in Los Angeles. They are a franchise that is tied to having a certain style and a certain type of player. And that style is sort of offensive hockey. And that player is, you know, superstar scoring, right? So I think that's why there's going to be pressure from outside the organization with the people that, help pay the bills to do that.
Well, the difference is the Lakers play in Los Angeles and the Penguins play in Pittsburgh, and they're just people don't pay for that in Pittsburgh if you don't have the goods. People don't buy tickets.
Well, right, and so I think the question is, what will they pay for in Pittsburgh? I don't know that they'll pay for a rebuild. I think they will pay for an attempt to sort of sell a rebuild with those three players because there's such an affinity for those three players. But what the Penguins are going to have to do, and I don't think it's coming from within, is when they get a chance, and this is why I think you might see them move on from a guy like Russ, when they can create some space to go after a guy on the free agent market. I think they're going to try to do that because they feel like what they'll be able to sell guys is you can come to a market where you really matter, where the ownership has shown they know how to sort of create an environment that's very favorable to stars, where you have a lot of support, but you don't have that sort of intrusiveness that you have in places like Toronto or Montreal or sort of other sort of hockey markets. So I think the next phase of the Penguins and building them back up is no matter what happens with Letang and Malkin, I think you're going to see them, maybe not next summer, but the summer after that, really look to go and try to spend some of the cap space and spend some of the money, because they're going to look at it as we need to spend real money now to keep making money in the future because our fans expect this. And they have said they want their model to be that of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the Pittsburgh Steelers model has been, you don't have to win the championship every year, but you've got to give your fans a belief that you're contending every year. And then on some years, you're going to knock the door down, but you want to be knocking on the door every year. That's the model they want here. But the difference is they have to have stars. When they did not have stars in that sort of run towards that led up to the great drafts of the early 2000s for them, when they didn't have stars, it wasn't the lack of winning that didn't bring people. It was the lack of entertainment. People here want entertainment and they want winning, but they want entertainment first. Well,
that's just another reason why I think Ron Hextall and Brian Burke, I think they have two of the hardest jobs in hockey for the next number of years.
Yeah. Well, look, I think, Frank, you've had them say it to you. I mean, there's a reason Ron was told by Brian, this is a great job to have, but it's not going to be easy. They're asking the impossible here. And I feel bad in a way because they had done a really good job of exhausting all of their sort of revenue making options. And then this pandemic hit. And one thing about the Penguins is, and I've checked this, Frank, they have one of the most favorable arena deals in the league. They get, if Bruce Springsteen comes to the PPG Paints Arena, they get, other than what Bruce Springsteen takes, they get 90% of everything else. They do. That includes parking, concessions, and everything. They get every bit of parking during the day that is done for people that work in the city. So they have a lot of ways to make revenue, right? But they didn't in the pandemic because those ways weren't available to them. So you're right. Their mid-market status came back to haunt them in a way that it hasn't in a long time.
Mm-hmm. Rob, we really appreciate it. We always like to end off with rapid fire brought to you by Fantrax. The only rule is you have to answer every question. Okay. We'll start. We'll start it easy. If Rob Rossi's taking us out for dinner, what is the go-to dinner place in Pittsburgh?
Well, I would take you to my mom and dad's house and have a nice home-cooked Italian meal with the sauce recipe from my great-grandmother, Josephine, so homemade meatballs. And I'd bring some bread from Mancini's, fresh baked, and we'd have a lot of carbs, maybe a glass of red wine. Because, look, I could take you somewhere, but to really experience Pittsburgh, you gotta do it familia style. So that's what I do.
Okay, I like it. Now here's a fun one. If Rossi and Seravalli are out at the bar, who is the
never
first?
Happened, by the way, we've never been so far.
Who is the first willing to pay?
Well, one of us is a big time national newsbreaker now, so I would let
What are you saying? I've got alligator arms otherwise, or I did back when I worked at the paper?
I would say that Frank and I have both been very eager to pick up tabs in the past.
Nice.
The nice thing is neither of us are popular enough to have that tab be too big.
All right. So Lemieux, Crosby, Jagr, Malkin, you mentioned superstars. If those are the top four in the Pittsburgh Penguins folklore, who's number 5?
Marc-Andre Fleury. He's maybe, other than Mario, the most beloved player in franchise history. We were asking, like, how do they sell tickets? That'd be one way. Pay him some money to come back after this season in Chicago. I mean, his legend has only grown since he's left. But if we're looking for a skater, I would say the most important player in franchise history that doesn't get talked about enough is Paul Coffey. Paul Coffey coming here in 1987, having played with Mario at the Canada Cup. Mario has said this. It gave Mario sort of a legitimate superstar to play with. I think Coffey, more than anything, created that Penguin culture of press the puck, move the puck. They've tried to have puck-moving defensemen ever since him, but he was a guy that came here, and I've argued that his number should be retired, even though he didn't play he didn't even play 5 full seasons here, but his impact was large.
I love it. Yeah. And highly competitive player too.
Yeah.
When you, at the end of the season, you're going to describe Kasperi Kapanen's season as how?
I'm going to describe Kasperi Kapanen at the end of this season as a guy who has silenced a lot of critics, but might still be leaving people who expect huge offensive things from him wanting more. Because I think he's going to show himself to be a pretty good two-way player this year and a reliable player. But I think he's like a 25 goal guy. I don't know that he's much more than that. But I think this is the right place for him, and I think they're getting through to him. So I think he'll silence people that think he doesn't really care as much. He's not as committed. But I think the people that look at him as like a potential big-time offensive guy are going to still be going, there should be more there.
Who's the best quote on the Penguins?
Ever or right now?
Right now.
Right now. Oh, that's a good question. That's a really good question. I would say, honestly, it's probably either, take out Evgeni Malkin, because when he does speak to the media, generally, he usually delivers some sort of like amazing, like, we're not good or something like that. Who's a really good quote is Zach Aston Reese. A case in point, I was talking to him the other day, and one of the things he said was, I asked him about Teddy Bluger, and I was asking about Teddy Bluger's confidence, and he goes, he's a really confident guy, and okay, that's whatever. And he goes, he picked me up the other day, and he was listening to this Russian podcast, because he's always listening to things in Russian and always trying to talk in Russian. And he'll tell you, like, he can talk in a lot of different languages. Why can't we? And stuff like that. And I'm just like, I'm getting all this great material, and then this Zach Aston Reese is giving me all this great material, and then he's asked a question about like what his favorite cheat meal is, and he goes, well, I really like sushi. And we're like, huh? And he goes, but I really like it was a sub shop. I forget which one.
Jersey Mike's.
Jersey Mike's. Yeah, he mentioned, thanks, Frankie. He mentioned Jersey Mike's, and then he goes, I don't know why, but it's so damn good. And we're like, you just dropped Teddy Bluger's fascination with Russian podcasts and somehow conjoining sushi, which in Pittsburgh you should never want to eat. Trust me, it's an old Chad Brown thing from the Steelers. His wife used to famously say they can't do sushi in Pittsburgh despite having 3 rivers, which is true. And then he drops Jersey Mike's, and it's like, this was all in like a minute. And I'm like, my God, man, like, you're good. I'm going to keep him here forever just because of that.
That's actually a really good line about the 3 rivers and no sushi. I like it.
Have you seen our rivers? You wouldn't want anything.
I do love 3 Rivers Stadium, though. I will say that.
My great grandfather named it, by the way.
Yeah. Ooh, nice.
Yeah.
Now, the greatest sports statue I personally have seen is Roberto Clemente in Pittsburgh. I think it's unbelievable. Will there be a Sidney Crosby statue similar to Clemente when he's done?
So here's a little known fact for your audience. If you come to PPG Paints Arena and you see the place where the Lemieux statue is, you'll notice that it's sort of like a pavilion, an outside pavilion, not covered. That was made that way because they wanted it to be similar to Montreal, where there are many statues.
Yes.
So the plan is to have a Sidney Crosby statue. Before we get to that, and this is where I don't know if he's getting a statue, but I will say that within the next 3 years, we're going to see only the second jersey retirement in the history of the Penguins when it comes to Michel Briere's jersey hangs from the rafters and nobody's worn 21, but that was because he died in a tragic accident. The only jersey that's been retired officially is Mario Lemieux's. Within the next 3 years, the Penguins are looking at bringing back Jaromir Jagr, bringing it full circle, and raising his 68 to the rafters.
He's got to stop playing first.
Yeah, well, that's the biggest problem. He's like, I would love to do this, but I still play. So they're trying to like get a time where like they could make it work. But there's going to be a Crosby statue. It's like I said, I really do believe Sid's probably going to. I can definitely see a situation where Mario sells a good chunk of his share to Sid, and Sid sort of does that when he's done, and then realizes he doesn't really want to ever be a GM and just sort of kick back and, you know, have a fun time owning a hockey club. But
nice.
He's gonna get it. He's gonna get it. And you're right about that Clemente statue. It is whoever, when they designed that, it's perfect because it's literally the way it looked like he coming out of the box.
Yeah, and it's so big. I love it. Rob, thanks so much for joining us in the DFO Rundown, man. We really appreciate it.
Anytime. I'll tell you real quick, guys, too, about Mario's statue. I remember talking to him the day it was, whatever. And he goes, he just was unhappy that day. And I said, what are you so unhappy about? He goes, usually they don't do this until you're dead. I'm not planning on dying anytime soon.
Perfect ending, Rob. Thanks so much.
Take care, gentlemen.
Rob Rossi, man, he's a beauty. Some great intel about Pittsburgh. No sushi in Pittsburgh. Something to know next time I'm there.
Oddly, I think I've actually eaten sushi in Pittsburgh with Rob, which is And
it was average.
I survived. I mean, I didn't end up. And who's kidding who? Like I always joke, like I'd be down with like a 3-week stomach virus, drop 50 pounds.
Oh, jeez. Well, Frankie, that was the Rundown episode. Max Pacioretty, 67, brought to you by Fantrax. Reminder to all of our listeners, go to fantrax.com/DFO Rundown. That's where you can register. Fantastic season-long fantasies. If you got keepers or if you want to redraft league or a dynasty, do it all. And you can enter to win a signed Nathan McKinnon jersey. Have a great weekend. There'll be lots more cuts and more to talk about in episode 68.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Seravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.